of having with us the Minister for Economy and Finance from Paraguay. So I'm surrounded here by high-level ministers. And so I would also like you to give a round of applause there. Your applause is taken as consent, so they are approved as our co-chairs. Thank you very much. And I will now give the floor to the Spanish minister so that José Manuel, you can lead us into the next session. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, chère Amélie.
Thank you very much, dear Amélie. I'm going to speak in Spanish. Good afternoon. Welcome to the launch of the Latin American Economic Outlook 2024. It's the 17th edition. This is a flagship report for our region, and it's very timely because, as has already been said, we're talking about financing for sustainable development. And so the LEO will help prepare the 4th conference for financing for development of the United Nations that Spain will host in the city of Seville in July of next year. And we hope that all the countries that are in this room will be represented at the highest level. This is the first such summit in the last 10 years, and it's a very crucial topic so that we can continue to make headway globally. Spain is very committed to disseminate this LEO edition. We do it in our country, we disseminate it in Spain, and also through our embassies and cooperation bureaus and cultural centers. We also disseminate LEO in Latin America and in the Caribbean. And the reason I'm here today is to show how committed Spain is with the region and, of course, with the OECD and the Development Center. And I'd like to thank the Development Center of the OECD for the very good contribution. You've continued to build bridges between the OECD and Latin America and the Caribbean. And I think there are 3 aspects in this LEO that we need to highlight. First of all, the links between different institutions involved in preparing LEO, the very robust knowledge and analysis that it produces, and the fact that we're covering many different countries and a big region, Latin America and the Caribbean, looking at the private sector, looking at international cooperation and other important aspects. We recently took over from Ecuador the rotating presidency of the Ibero-American Summit. And the next summit will be held in Spain in 2026. And development and the development agenda will have pride of place. So we all need to work together so that we can always hear the voice of Latin America. We're going to be also working with the Development Center to find shared visions and areas where we can work together on such important topics, such as development, the vulnerability index, a multi-dimensional vulnerability index, South-South cooperation, triangular cooperation, gender equality, the fight against the effects of climate change, and the fight against loss of biodiversity. We're all going to work on this together because we all want to build more inclusive and more sustainable societies. And of course we need to grow, but not only grow, we need to close gaps as well. We need to fight inequality. And in order to do this, funding is absolutely key. It's really the foundation to then be able to achieve all of our objectives. And so this means that we need to work better with the private sector. We need to make sure that we have an approach that includes social justice, inclusion, and I think that LEO, of course, makes a key contribution in all of these aspects. And so I now look forward to this meeting and all of the interventions we're going to be hearing. Thank you very much, Minister, sir. I invite all the partners of LEO to join us up here. You know that this is a team work. The OECD carries it out with a number of regional and international institutions. For instance, the French Development Agency, but many other organizations, in particular from Latin America and the Caribbean. So it's important that they're all represented here today. What I suggest is that we listen to Matthias Kormann, who's going to be talking specifically about the Latin American economic outlook. Then we'll give the floor to the President of Paraguay, the Vice President of El Salvador, and the President of the Council of Ministers of Peru. And we'd like to thank you for being here today. We'll be able to hear also your point of view and your evaluation of this work. Thank you. So if we can show the video of Matthias Kormann.
Guests, colleagues, friends all, a very warm welcome to this launch of the 2024 Latin American Economic Outlook, or the LEO, focusing on financing for sustainable development. Thank you to our long-standing partners, the United Nations Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, the Development Bank of Latin America and the Caribbean, and the European Commission for the productive cooperation in preparing this outlook. This year's outlook shows that economic growth in Latin America and the Caribbean economies was 2.2% in 23 and is estimated at 1.8% this year, which is well down from the relatively high levels of 7% in 21 and 4% in 22, when economies were recovering strongly from the COVID-19 pandemic. Countries across the region have extraordinary potential they can draw on to unlock stronger growth into the future. They are an attractive destination for foreign investment. Indeed, in 2023, foreign direct investment amounted to 2.8% of GDP on average, representing 14.5% of total global foreign direct investment, considerably above the region's share of the global population or global GDP. Latin America and the Caribbean has a young and talented population, with 23.2% of the population under the age of 15, compared to 17.3% across the OECD. And it's a region which generates a third of global renewable energy supplies, with further room to grow that further. There are several structural reform challenges to tackle, though. Strengthening productivity, which was around a third of OECD levels in 2023. Reducing labour market informality and providing better employment and training opportunities for workers, and continuing progress in lowering poverty, which has declined by 18% since 2020. More high-quality investment will be key for the region to tackle these challenges, boost sustainable development, and durably increase living standards. The financing gap in the region for economic development, in line with the Sustainable Development Goals, is estimated to be $99 billion US annually. At the same time, countries across the region are facing pressures on the sustainability of their public debt, in particular after elevated spending during the COVID-19 pandemic. Private finance needs to be scaled up, including from domestic sources. 78% of total investment in the Latin America and Caribbean region comes from the private sector, compared to 84% on average across the OECD. Towards this, the Latin American Economic Outlook outlines several key priorities. First, they need to deepen financial markets. Domestic credit provided to the private sector amounted to 50% of GDP in 2022 across the region, which is well below the average level in OECD economies of 146%. Strengthening the regional integration of domestic capital markets, including by creating common trading platforms or by integrating stock exchanges, would provide more investment opportunities at lower costs and boost overall investment. Second, by enhancing the accessibility of financial services to facilitate investment. Micro and small enterprises will also benefit from easier access to credit to make startup investments and to expand their operations. Access to basic financial services remains a major barrier, with bank account ownership in Latin America and the Caribbean of only 57% in 2021, well below the OECD average of 94%. Digital innovation provides a major opportunity by allowing access to lower-cost banking and payment services and new techniques for households and businesses to establish creditworthiness. Policymakers will need to ensure sound regulatory frameworks to protect consumers and financial stability without compromising innovation, while in parallel enhancing financial literacy to ensure consumers and small businesses are well prepared to make the most of new digital financial services. Third, by enhancing domestic resource mobilization to enable the necessary public investments in essential services and infrastructure. Further domestic revenue mobilization would help ensure governments have the resources they need, as tax revenues in the region were 21.5% of GDP in 2022, well below the OECD average of 34%. The OECD's Global Forum on Tax Transparency and Exchange of Information for Tax Purposes offers targeted capacity building and training support for Latin American and Caribbean governments to enhance tax collection. To help identify key priorities for further efforts, we will present the initial results of our latest analysis on tax incentives and tax morale, including data from 14 countries from the region at the annual OECD Latin American and Caribbean Fiscal Forum tomorrow. In closing, through deeper financial markets, more inclusive financial systems, and enhanced public investment, Latin America and the Caribbean can lay the foundations for further strong, sustainable, resilient, and inclusive growth and development. We look forward to continuing our work with policymakers across the region, including and in particular through the OECD Latin America and Caribbean Regional Program, to seize these opportunities and to support that strong, sustainable, resilient, and inclusive growth across the region. Thank you very much.
Merci.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, you have the floor.
Two roads diverge in a wood, and we took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. Dear friends, these words by a great American poet, Robert Frost, reflect in a nutshell the last 20 years of public policy in Paraguay. While the world attention has been focused on our neighbors, their constant ideological pendulum swing, fluctuating at times contradictory public policy, and the always menacing specter of populism, Paraguay has chosen a different path, one of quiet but profound transformation. As I remarked earlier today, my country has learned the lesson that there are no easy routes, no free lunches for attaining development. No, only the arduous and at a time very painful path of reform can yield prosperity. This is why in the last 20 years we have been working very hard, in silence and with unwavering commitment, to make Paraguay a model of economic stability, institutional reform, and also an economy that is at the same time 100% green, truly sustainable. Paraguay is a country that is proud of its glorious history but does not dwell in the past. The future is bright and full of promises, and we will conquer it. For too long, my nation has carried the weight of misconceptions and outdated perceptions. But Paraguay is not a sleepy Arcadia anymore, a slumbering backwater, an isolated island surrounded by land, as the great Paraguayan writer Augusto Roa Basto once called it. The Paraguay of today is a completely different story. It is a hidden gem, a vibrant economy, destined to take the place in the international arena. We have built our institutions brick by brick, strengthening our democracy election after election, and modernized our economy step by step, not with grandiose declarations, but with persistent actions and a steadfast grip on public policies. Our recent attainment of investment grade is thus the consequence, and at the same time the most precious evidence of these years of toil and hard work. We have chosen the different path, and that has made all the difference. Today, as I share our perspective on economic perspective in the region, I will also very briefly tell you about this journey, about how a nation often overlooked has quietly become one of Latin America's most stable democracy and resilient democracy.
Distinguished authorities, it's a real honor to be able to attend this meeting on the Latin American economic outlook. This document isn't just a set of figures and analysis. It really bears witness to our ability to think together. It's a real roadmap for our future. Let me give you my own vision of how we got to this point and where we should head for now as a region. Globalization started at the end of last century, where there was a lot of enthusiasm and a shared objective. The world that had seen two dreadful world wars was seeking a path towards stability and cooperation through two fundamental pillars: this multilateral institutions and global open markets. But today, the idea of globalization is in crisis. We see the emergence of protectionism, nationalism, and a number of individualist behaviors in economic terms. And I think that there are three major crises that have led to this major shift. The first was the financial crisis of 2008. Not only did it affect global financial markets, but it undermined trust in the very financial system. It was tantamount to the Great Depression that led to a number of vulnerabilities in our interconnected financial system. The second shock was the structural decrease of the Chinese economy. It had two-figure growth, and China was the engine of global growth. But with a slowdown in China, the whole dynamic of world trade was affected. The third shock, quite clearly, was the COVID-19 pandemic. It had a huge human toll, of course, but it also led to huge economic disruption. It paralyzed value chains and it exposed our vulnerabilities. These different disruptions led to political attitudes that went against globalization, against the opening of our economies and global trade, very often with populist promises that undermined the vision of an interconnected world. This new reality is difficult for Latin America. It's difficult for small countries. Big economies can afford to isolate their economies, but we need access to markets. Our region is faced with a paradox. We are important for the global future, but we're also very vulnerable every time there is a shock. Latin America and the Caribbean have 60% of global biodiversity. We have clean energy, and we are also important for food supply chains. Therefore, as the world seeks to diversify their value chains, our region offers resources and offers stability and is committed to democratic values. But we must recall that at the same time, as a region, we are dependent on the good health of the more developed countries and their markets. Every time there is a crisis, Latin America and the Caribbean suffer. And this is why we cannot remain indifferent. We believe that faced with these challenges, we need to go back to basics. What does this mean? We need to look at the basis of the economy and try to see how we can grow. We need macroeconomic stability. This is absolutely key. When the pandemic started 5 years ago, we saw that countries used monetary policy and fiscal policy to try to face the economic consequences of the pandemic. But many countries have not yet been able to normalize the situation after this pandemic. Paraguay understands what the impact of these crises is. Our history has been affected by three major tragedies. First of all, the War of the Triple Alliance against Brazil, Argentina, and Uruguay. 2/3 of the population was wiped out. Our economy was in ruins. Our country became a huge graveyard. Then the war with Bolivia, the Chaco War. Again, we were threatened as a nation, and this hindered our economic progress. And thirdly, a long authoritarian winter where military dictatorships stifled any attempt to build democratic institutions that would be inclusive, as Robinson, the Nobel Prize, described. So, in Paraguay, we know crises, we know difficulties, but we also know how to rise from our ashes. Over the past 20 years, we have seen an extraordinary transformation in my country. Paraguay is an example of macroeconomic stability and sustainable growth in the region, and also a model for the world. Why not? We have a rate of growth of 2.1% for this year, and we hope that we will have a rate of growth of 4% next year. This isn't an isolated figure. Over the past 20 years, our country has seen continuous growth from 2003 to 2023. We have had an average rate of growth of 3.6% annually. This is a lot more than neighboring countries. This shows how our country has been very resilient, even faced with global shocks. We have a very strong basis, a very low rate of debt. We have controlled inflation that's under the regional average, and a good monetary policy that leads to stability without undermining development. So, with resolve, we have built robust and transparent institutions. Our democracy, that has celebrated its 35th birthday this year, has been able to be shored up and strengthened with each public debate, with each election, and we have become a model in the region for clean and transparent elections. We've also modernized our regulatory framework with open government. We have one of the best transparency laws in the world, and we have a system for public procurement that has also become a model in terms of public procurement. The solidity of our financial system has been key, of course, in this process, in this transformation. Our banking sector is a pillar of stability and growth. Adopting new financial technologies and the modernization of our payment system shows that we are ready to evolve. In terms of the environment, Paraguay is also a model. Our energy mix is one of the cleanest and most sustainable energy mixes in the world. We have 100% green, clean and renewable energy, thanks to the electric grid that we share with our neighboring countries. We have 40% of our forest coverage that is preserved, and our soja production is only grown on land that has not been deforested. We use the most friendly agricultural techniques available. We also adopted an emission of green and sustainable bonds, and this shows that we are fully committed to ensure economic growth that is sustainable. Therefore, it is no surprise that in July 2024, we were able to get investment grade from the rating agencies. And I think this is a real recognition of our prudent economic management and our macroeconomic stability. This achievement is not a coincidence. We worked hard for decades, and we try to overcome political disputes.
Dear friends and colleagues, our presence here today at the OECD is not due to chance, no. Paraguay has long been on the difficult path to becoming a respectable country with solid and inclusive institutions, a vibrant democracy, and a stable macroeconomic system which we believe can serve as a model for others. We aspire to become members of this distinguished organization because we share its more fundamental values: commitment to democracy, to transparency, to the rule of law, and to sound public policies. Thus, we are not here seeking prestige or favorable new headlines. For us, joining the OECD is much, much more. It is the culmination of that arduous path to modern, transparent, and inclusive public policy that began more than 20 years ago. With steadfast actions and not mere words, Paraguay has chosen the path less traveled, and that, my friend, has made all the difference. Thank you so much.
Gracias.
Thank you very much, President, sir. I'm now going to give the floor to a different country for maybe another viewpoint. The Vice President of El Salvador, Mr. Félix Ulloa. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Greetings to all my colleagues. Salvador is a member of the Development Center. We joined in 2019, and we are making efforts to try to become a full member of this very important organization. I would like to tell you about the new Salvador that we have been building since 2019, when, with President Bukele, we won the elections and came to office. The country we found was considered one of the most dangerous countries in the world, with over 100 homicides for every 100,000 inhabitants, one of the largest rates in the world. Today, El Salvador is one of the safest countries. It's the safest country on the American continent and the safest country in the Western world. We have a rate of homicide of 2 for every 100,000 inhabitants. So, after having taken up this challenge, because violence is often the first problem and it's the first reason why countries cannot develop, we managed to implement an action plan in 7 stages. We're on the 6th stage of this action plan, and so we reached out to our people, to our communities, to break the chains that tied our people because of criminality and violence. We had to declare war to the gangs. This happened in 2022. We used the obligation and right that states have to defend their citizens when their citizens are attacked. And this is what we did. And it was our first challenge during the first mandate. On the 1st of June, when we started the second mandate, President Bukele announced that El Salvador was ready to launch economic growth. He announced this as a miracle, something that we are going to do after having achieved our first miracle, the miracle of security in a violent country. And so we consulted many countries of the region. We tried to get technical assistance, and this is why we'd like to share this achievement. So once we had tranquility in our communities, once we'd put an end to violence, once we had harmony in our different neighborhoods, we started working for economic growth. And we can see, for example, many small and medium-sized companies being created, and this economic growth also has an action plan of 3 stages. The first stage was achieving food security. The second stage was developing innovation using more technology with a number of alliances with Google Cloud, for example. It's one. And the first stage, which is the one we're on now, has to do with the logistical development of our airports and ports. So we're on the good track. I think we're going to manage now our economic miracle at the end of our mandate. But having said that, we need also to make sure that governments are responsible in the way they manage public finances, because public and private investment are very important, but they require legal certainty, a good framework, a good tax regime that not only enable income in the public purse, but also that guarantee a certain number of conditions to the private sector so that they will be ready to invest. And El Salvador this year presented a budget without a fiscal deficit, a truly balanced budget. And this has been thanks to the vision that we've had in dealing with our public debt. I think this has been a key aspect. About 2 years ago, at the end of 2021, we started looking at our public debt and trying to see how we were going to manage our foreign debt so that we would be able to meet our international obligations, of course, but without having a negative ranking of our country. And this is why we adopted the Bitcoin in September 2021, trying not to have a negative ranking. And the multilateral organizations who were very critical, we managed to buy our debt back using a special reserve at the International Monetary Fund that was opened during the pandemic. And through the buying back of our bonds, we managed to save $260 million.
So this experience is in conformity with our efforts in the area of the environment. And I can tell you that recently we have completed the largest operation ever in our country of bond, or rather debt reconversion, so as to protect our natural resources in our country. This seems to be a complex operation, but in fact, thanks to the way the players have acted, it can be a role model for other countries in terms of financing of this sort. And this is a sovereign decision of key importance in our country, because we've invited the private bank, Morgan Chase, to help us manage our debt. And we have reached the situation where the DFC, the American body, has provided collateral for almost $1 trillion, and the Latin American Development Bank has also given us its support to the tune of $200 million in political risk insurance. So with this operation, we have saved over $350 million that will be invested in protection of the Lempa River Valley. And this will mean almost 10 million every year protecting that resource. So what I want to share with you is this vision, because we are changing paradigms, because you can see that developing countries like ours can take part in multilateral financial institutions, but in addition to that, we are doing other things so as to invest in the private sector. And we're also involving other civil society bodies, such as the Art Corporation, and the idea is that they will, as they work in the field of the environment, will provide guarantees for what we're doing. So there's the public sector, private banking, and civil society organizations that are all working together to improve and promote our country. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you so much. I'll now give the floor to the Prime Minister of Peru. So obviously we'd like to hear from you everything that's happening. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to spend all afternoon on Latin America. So once we've heard from you, we will move on and hear from other speakers. But you have the floor now, sir. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Dear representatives And ladies and gentlemen, Chairman, it's a great honor for me to speak to you this afternoon on the occasion of the launch of the Latin American Economic Outlook 2024 Funding for Sustainable Development. This is an excellent opportunity for us to look at the progress made in Latin America and the various challenges we have with respect to inclusive and sustainable development. 2024 has been a year of many challenges for us. Inflation, inequality compounded by the pandemic. All of this has fashioned the agenda of many countries, and at the same time we have undertaken necessary reforms to improve people's lives. Against this background, Peru has made huge efforts to drive quick and sustainable reactivation based on macroeconomic and fiscal stability within the framework of respect for the rule of law, constitutional order, and democracy. Thanks to our President, we have maintained these efforts over the last 2 decades with growth on average of 4.4%, double that of the region, with inflation controlled, with being single-digit for the last 30 years. This foundation has enabled us to project a growth of 3.2% on average for the period of 2024-2025, driven mainly by public and private investment, focusing on strategic infrastructure projects, along with the improvement consolidation of private consumption. Today, we have solid international reserves, the lowest levels of risk in Latin America, presence on world markets, and a stable, predictable, and transparent legal framework. On the fiscal front, we have implemented measures to guarantee the financial sustainability and have also fought against tax evasion and avoidance with legislation to combat tax evasion and a decree promoting infrastructure investment, particularly in clean energies. And our policy of financial inclusion has enabled us to open 25 million bank accounts for ordinary citizens just on presentation of their ID. Nonetheless, we still have major challenges in Latin America, in our own country, in particular the informal labor market, which concerns more than 50% of our workers. We're aware of the need to address this, and during our chair of APEC 2022, we adopted the Lima Roadmap in order to promote transition to formal global economy. This instrument, which is also mentioned in the joint declaration of this 9th reading, seeks ways of reducing economic vulnerability and promote formal labor markets and guarantee inclusive growth. In accordance with the principles of the OECD, this roadmap establishes a framework to reinforce our labor rights and improve productivity and guarantee sustainability. So Peru has firmly committed to sustainability. The financial roadmap, the green financial roadmap, as adopted as part of our national strategy, seeks to achieve 3% of GDP through environmental projects by 2030. We have, for example, issued green and sustainable bonds to achieve this. In addition, our free trade agreements, including the CPTPP, place Peru as a strategic partner in global markets, consolidating its stable legal framework for foreign investment. So I want to take this opportunity to ratify the accession process to OECD. This is a priority for Peru. We recognize that only this way will reinforce our institutions. So let me conclude. In this framework, the OECD Development Center plays a key role, a source of data analysis to address challenges such as informal labor market and promote more resilient economies. Its work, along with the 2030 Universal Social Protection and Lima Roadmap projects are essential to build an inclusive and sustainable development in the region. So we reaffirm our commitment, multilateral commitment, in order to build a prosperous future for our people. We'd like to thank the OECD and its partners for its constant support in this shared target. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Premier ministre.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. We can see in your statement how much you have reformed and how much we need to continue supporting. So now I'd like to give the floor to four speakers.
Sujet, mais il faut qu'on vous le présente. Donc c'est la directrice.
We have heard about the development center. We'll
ECLAC, puis
hear from its director, then Daniel Titelman, Director of Economic Development Division of ECLAC. Then
la directrice la parole.
We will have other speakers, but first you, Director, over to you.
Very much, Madam Chair. And dear colleagues, friends, again, glad to be with you. And I am delighted to have the opportunity to present the Latin American Economic Outlook for 2024. And I'm particularly and especially delighted to be here doing that with our co-authors, the ECLAC, the European Commission, and CAF Development Bank. Before we start, let me thank my partners, or our partners, for our great collaboration on this report. And I also would like to extend warm thanks to other partners who made this report possible: the Spanish Cooperation Agency, the French Development Agency, the Ministry of Planning from Colombia, Telefónica, and the University of Rosario. And this year's Leo, as you can see, and we have the copy fresh from the press here with us today, but it's also available online. This year's Leo is on financing sustainable development. And let me begin by mentioning a striking figure, $99 billion US. This is the annual spending gap that needs to be filled for Latin America and the Caribbean to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. And our decision to focus on the financing this year came very naturally. Our recent editions of the Leo have all identified financing as the key to success for the green and digital transformations. And the problem is that the fiscal space is tight, so governments have little room to maneuver. If we look at this chart, it shows how big the debt burden has become for many countries. And in the 10 countries with the blue bars, governments have, on average, spent more on interest payments than on the issue that we were discussing this morning, which is education, in recent years. My colleagues will share recommendations on how countries in the LAC region can fill the financing gap. If I can have the next slide, please. But before I pass the floor to Daniel Titelman, I would like to highlight the great importance of the regional approach. First, the LAC countries and their international partners need to promote regional financial integration to expand access to capital markets, and this would increase efficiency and improve liquidity. Secondly, we believe also that the region needs to bring a unified voice to the global table, and upcoming summits are a big opportunity to define the regional agenda and ensure that its priorities will be taken on board. With that, it's a pleasure to give the floor to my friend and colleague Daniel Titelman from ECLAC.
Well, thank you very much. And for ECLAC and CEPAL, it's an honor to participate in the launch of the Latin American Economic Outlook 2024. And thank you very much again. And since there is translation, I will continue in Spanish for the few slides I have. Lo
The first thing I want to focus on that has just been mentioned is the importance of regional and international agreements in order to mobilize the vast amounts of financial resources that we need to develop these countries, rise to the challenge of climate change, and drive growth. As you can see from this slide, fiscal space in our countries of Latin America and the Caribbean is fairly limited. And of course, this was compounded by the pandemic. And we've recovered slightly from that. And primary debt service is about 3% of our GDP. And what I want to focus on here, as also been mentioned, is that when you compare primary debt with global debt, or the deficit rather, is that debt service is a major problem for fiscal space in our countries. You can see on the right-hand chart that debt service tax revenues is much higher than it was in 2010. And this, yes, next please. And monetary stance is tight as well. And inflation is affecting our countries, and it's always the last mile that's most important, and central banks are reducing their interest rates, and with the stabilization of inflation, domestic credit is coming down as well. So in order to mobilize domestic resources, we have restrictions, monetary and fiscal-wise. So what we need to do is expand our fiscal space so that we can increase not just the tax burden on our countries, which is very low when you compare with other OECD countries, about 22% on average, but it's a structure that's highly regressive, and what we need to do is move towards a reform of our tax structure. And you can see that there's a big difference between tax structure between OECD and our region, is that in OECD countries, personal income tax is a large percentage, in our countries not. So that's where we need to focus our efforts, and we're discussing this internationally with the possibility of a wealth tax. This is all very important. And something that is also of key importance in order to improve and reinforce our fiscal space is innovative thematic instruments that can mobilize resources at lower rates and lower costs. And it's not just our countries that have to access these international markets, but have to do it at a more affordable cost. And it is very difficult for our countries at the moment in order to achieve sustainable debt levels. We have a long way to go. And I'll hand over to my colleague, Lea Jimenez.
For our institution, CAF, to be co-authoring this important report for the region. This graph here shows a stark reality. We see that the latest data reconfirms that low productivity growth is a structural challenge that constrained Latin America and the Caribbean for decades. Labor productivity in our region is far below the OECD average, and this is largely due to the way we utilize our resources. Our total factor productivity has been in decline since mid-1990s. And this isn't just about numbers. I think President Peña used that phrase. It is a symptom of deeper issues. It's about an underdeveloped financial system. It's about institutional weaknesses. And it's about significant gaps in human capital, which are holding back innovation, are holding back firm growth, and holding back economic resilience in the region. Without addressing these challenges, Latin America and the Caribbean will continue to struggle to compete globally and to generate opportunities for its people. Next. Low productivity affects nearly every sector in our economies. We have here trade, manufacturing, you name it, across the board. But the problem isn't insurmountable. We can fix the problem. We know how to fix the problem. We have to strengthen institutions, we have to improve the financial systems, and we have to address labor market constraints and rigidities. We also need target instruments to close the human capital gap and to foster a business environment that rewards innovation and also efficiency. This is a cross-cutting issue. Productivity is the backbone of economic growth, is the backbone of generating good jobs, generating employment, and is the backbone of social equity. By addressing these barriers, we can unlock the potential of our economies and improve livelihoods of the people in Latin America and the Caribbean. Next. One area that truly deserves special attention and doesn't get enough attention is MSMEs. They make up the bulk of businesses in Latin America and the Caribbean, and they play a crucial role in employment generation and economic activity. Yet, MSMEs don't get access, or at least not sufficient access to finance. This is a major obstacle for scaling up, for improving productivity, and for creating high-quality jobs. These are our job generators in the region. We have to pay more attention to them. DFIs, and in partnership with MDBs, are essential in addressing this gap. By providing guarantees, by providing loans and lines of credit, DFIs can enable successful MSMEs to grow, to create employment opportunities, and to drive productivity gains. And we also need to modernize the way in which we use these financing instruments to include underexplored areas such as the green transition, digitalization, and inclusivity. All of these areas are fundamental for global competitiveness. Next. Of course, we cannot overlook the role of capital markets. In LAC, these markets remain underdeveloped and highly concentrated, which limited participation from the private sector. Equity market capitalization averages just 35.5% of GDP in Latin America and the Caribbean, and this compares to 64.8% of GDP in OECD countries. The picture is similar for the bond market, which is dominated by public sector's issuance. Underutilized capital markets represent a missed opportunity for Latin America and the Caribbean. We need to expand access through target reforms, improving capital market literacy, especially among MSMEs, promoting institutional investors' participation, developing alternative financing mechanisms, encouraging and facilitating regional financial integration. Addressing the financial gap, I will use this phrase again, is not just about fixing numbers. It's about empowering businesses, especially MSMEs, to thrive, to innovate, and to truly transform the economic and social landscape of Latin America and the Caribbean. Thank you. I yield the word to the colleague from EC.
Much for the invitation. So the report for 2024 focuses on the financing levels that are necessary to implement the ambitious agenda of sustainable investments in the region, and to finance sustainable development and promote well-being for all, leaving no one behind. Domestic resources are essential, and the European Union actively supports domestic resource mobilization by strengthening public finance management and institutions. While international financing can complement domestic resources, and of course, official development assistance remains a valuable tool, official development assistance alone is totally insufficient. Rather, official development aid should serve as a catalyst, leveraging additional resources and enabling broader impacts. Investment, both public and private, is crucial. Achieving our goals requires a paradigm shift in how we approach development financing. Next slide, please. So against this context, the European Union is moving away from a cooperation model purely based on official development assistance towards one in which also other financing sources are highly considered, and in particular private investments. And Global Gateway is our vision in this shift. As part of Global Gateway, the European Union is preparing the launch of the Global Green Bond Initiative, which will provide transformative tools to catalyze investment in environmentally sustainable projects through green bonds. In Latin America and the Caribbean, we are working with partner countries to design and to implement the ECLAC Global Gateway Investment Agenda. And with this agenda, we expect to leverage, to mobilize up to 45 billion euro for the region by 2027. It is a comprehensive offer to ensure sustainable investment at scale. The EU institutions and the member states of the European Union work as Team Europe, promoting a partnership between the European Union and its member states, development finance institutions, export credit agencies, and the private sector. And through Global Gateway, we are committed to the highest environmental, social, and transparency standards. And the program includes, in the agenda, go beyond traditional investment, aiming to create local added value, encourage formal jobs, promote innovation through technology exchange, and contribute to human development. So, through Global Gateway, we follow a 360-degree approach for supporting investment. This means that we combine investment in hard and soft infrastructure with the surrounding ecosystems that make this investment sustainable, value-based, and attractive to partners and other investors. So today the report offers important guidance in this process, also in the run-up of the 4th International Conference on Financing for Development that will take place next year in Spain. And from our side, the European Union stands ready to continue the dialogue and cooperation with all of you to address the challenges that we face in the Latin American Caribbean region and globally, and to advance the green, digital, and social transitions. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Je pense que tout le monde maintenant a envie de lire le rapport, donc n'hésitez pas à flash-coder le code ou à aller sur le site de l'OCDE pour le lire. Il est en accès libre et toutes les données, tous les graphiques sont voilà, partageables et je crois à regarder en détail. Je vais donc maintenant passer la parole à un autre pays de la région, Monsieur le ministre Manuel Toval, qui est le ministre du Commerce extérieur du Costa Rica, et qui présidera en juin prochain la grande réunion ministérielle de l'OCDE. Donc, à vous la parole.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente du comité directeur du Centre de développement de l'OCDE. C'est un honneur de vous accompagner dans ce dialogue de haut niveau au nom du Costa Rica et bien sûr, comme vous avez remarqué, à ma qualité de président de la prochaine réunion ministérielle de l'OCDE 2025. I want to thank the Development Center once again for delivering such an insightful and valuable public policy report for Latin America and the Caribbean. Costa Rica profoundly appreciates the contributions of this report, which acknowledge the key role that financing can play for sustainable development. Latin America and the Caribbean is a region of immense potential and diversity, yet it stands at a crossroads. We face a convergence of challenges, strong economic shocks with lasting effects, relatively low productivity growth, sustained inequality, and the pressing demands of the green transition. These hurdles transcend national borders, representing shared vulnerabilities that require collective action, innovation, and bold leadership. Today, as we gather to align economic and social priorities, we must also confront the structural barriers that limit our progress. These include high levels of informality, comprising over half of the region's workforce, and significant public debt that deters our ability to invest in critical areas such as infrastructure, education, and health. The pressing need to transition to a low-carbon economy and to address social inequalities exacerbated by global challenges further compound these issues. Amid these difficulties lies an opportunity to rethink our approach to financing sustainable development. This moment calls on us to make public spending more efficient and effective, enhance long-term planning, and allocate resources more strategically. By adopting innovative financial instruments, fostering robust public-private partnerships, and deepening international collaboration, especially through platforms like the OECD, which provides a unique avenue for sharing best practices and capacity building, we can succeed in breaching financial gaps that stand in the way of progress. Costa Rica reaffirms its commitment to lead by example in building a more inclusive and sustainable financial market that fosters economic resilience and equitable growth by embracing innovative financial instruments. Aligned with the regional priorities of enhancing financial accessibility and leveraging digital transformation, our government has focused on integrating technology into forward-thinking public policies, while increasing our population's access to financial services, overcoming obstacles, and setting benchmarks for innovation in financial inclusion. As we know, the Latin American Economic Outlook is a pillar of the OECD's strategic work with the ECLAC region. In this line, Costa Rica, as chair of the next 2025 Ministerial Council meeting, is committed to keeping the ECLAC region at the forefront of global discussions. We look forward to amplifying the voices of the ECLAC countries, aiming that our region's challenges and opportunities are duly acknowledged and properly addressed. We are committed to showcasing the innovative solutions and resilience that the ECLAC region may bring to the global stage, especially in tackling pressing challenges such as climate change, inequality, and sustainable financing. By fostering meaningful dialogue and collaboration within the organization and beyond, we can pave the way for solutions tailored to the region's specific needs, while offering valuable insights and strategies for the global economy. Together, we can ensure that our region not only addresses its own challenges, but also becomes a model for resilience, inclusivity, and sustainable growth. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Ministre. Et on voit bien le lien entre cette réunion aujourd'hui et ce qui se fera en juin. Et je crois que c'est important qu'on voit bien que voilà, ce n'est pas qu'une réunion, c'est un processus pour poursuivre. Je vous passe la parole maintenant pour conclure cette session à Bertrand Wagner, qui est le directeur général délégué de l'Agence française de développement, et pour que vous puissiez aussi présenter votre point de vue. Et puis ensuite, nous passerons à la session suivante.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président de la République du Paraguay, Messieurs les ministres, Madame la directrice du Centre de développement de l'OCDE, Madame la présidente de cette session, Mesdames et Messieurs. C'est un honneur et merci beaucoup à l'OCDE pour son invitation à intervenir à l'occasion de la publication de cette 17e édition du rapport sur les perspectives économiques de l'Amérique latine. Peut-être 3 points principaux du point de vue de l'Agence française de développement. Le premier, pourquoi notre contribution à ce rapport ? La première raison, c'est parce que nous investissons 2 milliards d'euros par an en Amérique latine, dans les différents pays représentés à cette table. Et comme le président de la République du Paraguay l'a mentionné, partager une connaissance commune, une compréhension commune et planifier conjointement les perspectives stratégiques et les priorités de développement de l'Amérique latine est quelque chose qui nous paraît absolument fondamental pour être en capacité de réussir des investissements qui ont du sens, qui sont cohérents avec les politiques publiques de ces États et qui sont également cohérents avec les priorités politiques portées par les gouvernements d'Amérique latine. Nous remercions à ce titre nos partenaires, la CAF, dont la représentante à ma gauche, Madame Jiménez, que je salue, est un très bon partenaire de l'Agence française de développement, OECD et la Commission européenne, qui sont également importants pour nous mobiliser dans ces géographies. Le deuxième sujet, alors là je vais faire le lien avec ce que Madame la Présidente vous disiez en introduction de votre propos. Comment faire le lien entre ce rapport et les impacts des projets de développement que nous finançons? Je voudrais vous donner quelques exemples. Un premier qui est un partenariat que nous avons avec Bancoldex, la Banque de Colombie, dont je salue le représentant ici. Nous finançons conjointement avec Bancoldex des projets dans le domaine de l'économie verte et dans la transition énergétique de petites et moyennes entreprises de Colombie. Un deuxième partenariat, c'est celui que nous avons avec la Banque nationale du Costa Rica, où nous finançons des projets sur le climat et avons mobilisé une assistance technique et une expertise technique internationale pour accompagner la Banque nationale du Costa Rica et ses clients en matière de transition énergétique. Un troisième exemple que nous faisons cette fois-ci, sur lequel nous travaillons en République dominicaine, dont je salue également le représentant. Nous travaillons avec les partenaires dominicains sur de la recherche et développement dans le développement de cultures de cacao sous ce qu'on appelle couvert végétal, à savoir dans des forêts, ce qui permet à la fois d'augmenter le rendement et de protéger la biodiversité et de lutter contre le changement climatique. Les différents projets que je cite ici ont pour objectif de conjuguer développement économique, résultats concrets dans les pays dans lesquels nous travaillons, création de valeur, création de richesses, création d'emplois, et de tenir compte, évidemment, des enjeux de développement durable. Et Madame Jiménez, vous présentiez un petit peu plus tôt l'évolution du ratio de productivité du travail dans les pays d'Amérique latine. Ce que je trouverais intéressant, et je le dis pour les équipes de l'OCDE et pour les équipes de l'AFD à l'avenir, c'est que nous puissions réfléchir aux modalités de calcul d'un ratio de productivité pondéré par l'impact sur le développement durable des politiques économiques et des mesures qui sont mises en œuvre pour implémenter et pour mettre en œuvre des lois dans le travail, des lois dans le financement de l'économie qui ont un impact sur la lutte contre le changement climatique, qui ont un impact sur la lutte contre la biodiversité. Et donc de la même manière que les 3 conférences des parties, climat, biodiversité, lutte contre la dégradation des terres, sont en train de réfléchir à des cadres standards et à des matrices communes d'indicateurs pour mesurer l'impact des financements que nous mobilisons, je trouve que là aussi, sur le plan économique, il y aurait de la valeur à mieux rendre cohérente et à mieux intégrer les enjeux de productivité d'une part, si c'est l'indicateur qui est important dans les discussions que nous avons, et les enjeux en matière d'émissions de carbone et d'émissions et de protection de la biodiversité. Voilà, ce sera peut-être un enjeu pour les années à venir dans le cadre des travaux que nous menons ensemble. Un dernier point peut-être sur le calendrier de 2024 et le calendrier de 2025. 2024 a été une année très riche avec les 3 conférences des parties, avec cette réunion de la COP29 à Bakou qui a abouti à la mobilisation de 300 milliards d'euros, en tous les cas aux engagements pris par les États de mobiliser 300 milliards d'euros pour financer la lutte contre le changement climatique. Il va maintenant falloir s'atteler à la façon dont nous allons calculer et dont nous allons mobiliser ces financements, et l'OCDE aura un rôle tout particulier à jouer dans la capacité à suivre les financements que les États vont mobiliser à cet effet. 2025 sera une année très riche. Le sommet Finances en commun qui se tiendra fin février prochain au Cap, en Afrique du Sud, en partenariat avec la Banque asiatique de financement des infrastructures et avec DBSA, qui est la banque publique sud-africaine, sera l'occasion de rappeler l'importance de la mobilisation des banques publiques de développement dans le financement de la transition climatique, dans le financement de la protection de la biodiversité et dans le financement de la lutte contre la dégradation des terres. Ce sera également l'occasion, Madame la Présidente, d'évoquer et d'essayer d'avancer sur un sujet important pour vous et sur lequel vous vous mobilisez beaucoup, qui est celui de l'évolution des cadres réglementaires prudentiels auxquels les institutions, notamment européennes, sont astreintes aujourd'hui. A été présenté par la Commission européenne des chiffres sur le montant des financements privés qui permettent le développement et qui permettent l'investissement en Amérique latine. Il représente aujourd'hui 60% des investissements dédiés au financement de l'investissement en Amérique latine. Il serait probablement encore plus significatif si les cadres réglementaires et prudentiels, qui sont ceux auxquels les institutions du secteur européen doivent aujourd'hui respecter, si ces cadres prudentiels et réglementaires pouvaient un peu évoluer et mieux tenir compte du niveau de risque et de la spécificité des géographies sud-américaines. Et j'espère que le rapport que nous vous avons présenté aujourd'hui pourra y contribuer. Et puis enfin, 2 grandes échéances en 2025. Le sommet sur le financement du développement de Séville, qui doit être l'occasion, là aussi, du point de vue de l'Agence française de développement et des banques publiques de développement qui sont réunies dans le cadre de l'initiative Finances en commun, de montrer comment la finance publique, dont les mandats sont définis par les gouvernements actionnaires de ces établissements publics, de montrer comment cette finance publique peut se mobiliser pour financer le développement durable. Et nous aurons enfin un rendez-vous à Belém, fin 2025, avec cette conférence des parties dont le Brésil, après avoir présidé le G20, va assurer la présidence. Et là encore, ce sera un moment extrêmement important, notamment pour voir comment opérationnaliser l'agenda sur la mobilisation de 300 milliards de financement, 300 milliards de dollars de financement dans la lutte contre le changement climatique. Encore une fois, je remercie les équipes de l'OCDE pour les travaux que l'Agence française de développement a pu effectuer avec ses équipes, et nous aurons beaucoup de plaisir à continuer à travailler avec elles. Je vous remercie.
Merci beaucoup. Effectivement, il y a beaucoup de sujets sur lesquels on peut continuer à travailler, notamment celui de la mobilisation du secteur privé et d'avoir un cadre général qui soit cohérent. Donc, je remercie tous les participants à cette session. Je remercie aussi ceux qui nous ont suivis en ligne, ceux qui étaient dans la pièce. Et donc, je vais clore cette session de présentation du rapport économique sur l'Amérique latine. Et nous allons passer maintenant à une session, comme on dit, closed doors, donc avec uniquement les pays invités à la table. Et donc, je remercie ceux qui doivent nous quitter de le faire. Et je passe donc la parole au ministre espagnol.
Thank you very much. I open, though, this session that will focus on regional perspective on financing sustainable development, and I will do it starting in Spanish. Presido hoy esta primera sesión de la reunión de alto nivel del Centro de Desarrollo, en la que reflexionamos sobre las perspectivas regionales de la financiación al desarrollo, guiados por la labor constante del Centro en la promoción del desarrollo sostenible desde un enfoque inclusivo y diseñando soluciones a retos comunes e intercambiando buenas prácticas. Este es un momento especialmente oportuno tras la celebración la semana pasada en Nueva York del segundo comité preparatorio de esa cuarta conferencia de financiación al desarrollo que hablaba en la sesión anterior, que va a tener lugar